he's having to say.
He hasn't processed it. It hasn't hit him yet. But in the next couple of days it will, and he's still going to fight. We talked about filing an appeal once he's sentenced. We talked about the state can still go forward on count one, which we kind of knew they were before Ms. Corey even gave her statement. We kind of knew. So that is definitely in play at this point. I've got to talk to him. I've got to talk to the family, see where we go from here. But in just terms of a reaction, extremely disappointed, but I won't put any fault at all on the jury. They did their job, and that was it.
Mr. Stroll, do you plan on continuing as Mr. Dunn's attorney?
Right now, yes. Again, I've got to talk to the family. There's definitely some procedural bars at play and what has to happen next. So depending on if Judge Healy goes through a sentencing, depending on when Ms. Angela refiles it or Ms. Corey refiles it, I apologize. There may be some other factors at play, but again, as you knew from the beginning.
We're going to get you to the Olympic coverage here if you're watching on NBC, so if you want to watch that, if you want to continue watching this, flip over to our ABC channel, ABC 25, and we will continue with all of our coverage of the Michael Dunn trial.
Talking heads out there, talking about, what they believed and what they perceived. But again, it's easy to talk when you have a $300,000 budget to defend someone versus not even a tenth of that. So we will find out in the future what and how that goes. But right now, I plan on being there at sentencing. I plan on filing motions on his behalf going forward at this point.
Will you file a motion for a change of venue?
For the retrial on count one, I almost think we would have to, but again, I may not be the counsel at that point. We're a long ways away from that, but it's definitely something to consider based on the factors that led up to it. And then now, I think that might be a stronger aspect, but again, I can't speculate of what's going to happen way in the future.
So a simple question, I'm sorry, what are you basing an appeal on?
Just a lot of the factors. There's pretrial rulings, there's evidence that came up, there's evidence that was out, there was jury instructions.
Your expert witness who wasn't allowed to testify, how big an issue is that going to be on appeal?
You never know. It clearly could be an issue, it would be an issue, but my concern of how big of an issue, again, that's up for the DCA to decide, or the Supreme Court after that. What we feel is a big issue, sometimes the DCA doesn't agree at all.
How are Michael Dunn's parents doing right now?
As I said before, they're devastated. Even from the get-go, we had talked the other night about they were always upset and extended condolences. I know there were things said by their attorneys that condolences weren't reached out to the Davis family. But again, I was standing next to Miss Corey when I talked to Miss McBath's husband and extended those condolences to the Davis family. So, and they still feel bad. Again, and we agree with Mr. Davis on this point, Ron Davis, there was no winners. Everybody lost something in this. The Davis family lost their son. Their son's birthday was supposed to be tomorrow, and that's going to be hard for them. So I think tomorrow there's going to be two sets of families that are going to be grieving because of what happened here tonight.
Angela Corey just said that she does not think that the George Zimmerman case had anything to do or any influence on this case. What do you think about it?
I don't know. I'd love to get into the jurors' minds. I'd love to get into what was going on. I know you guys asked her about political statements and things like that, and I think what I originally said in my press conference is you have to ask Ms. Corey. And I said I'm going to know what her answer is, and I expected her answer to be that. But it is hard. You don't know. You don't know what goes into factors. The fact that that jury was back there deliberating again for over 3 straight days, and we don't know what was being said. The fact that they didn't come back on a grand jury indictment, it was a lesser, and we don't know about count one. And again, if you look at one of the questions they asked, is self-defense for one, self-defense for all. And our position is, and based on the case law, that may be an issue on appeal, that if a jury would have decided self-defense was an issue with count one, Mr. Davis, it would have applied to every single person in that car. So that may be an issue that we have to look at. And the fact that that issue was hung and there was no verdict on it, we don't know what the jury was thinking. We don't know what they were speculating to. We don't know, had they exonerated Mr. Dunn on count one, then counts 2, 3, and 4 fall by the wayside.
It was asked with Ms. Corey that was just some of the counts looking at a maximum of 60 years at age 47. Was it even necessary for them to go ahead and retry on if he's basically looking at life in prison? Do you think it's necessary at all?
Is it going to be consecutive or concurrent, these sentences?
Again, sentencing is a long way off, but to go to your original question, right, he is looking at 60 years because of the aggravating factor that a firearm was used. Chances are it could easily be run consecutive with Judge Healy, so again, at 60 years, I don't think Ms. Corey's going to try to recharge it thinking, well, I'm going to tack on more time. I don't think that's going to be her mindset. I don't think that was her mindset in the beginning. I think you still have to talk to the Davis family and see if they want closure, see if they want to go through another trial, see if 60 years is acceptable. And again, if they recharge it, that's Ms. Corey's discretion. She can recharge it and go forward. She has that right as the state attorney. But I agree, if he was sentenced to 60 years and you assume that he did not get his convictions overturned on appeal, you are looking at basically life in prison. At 47 years old, you're right, that's a life sentence regardless of count one.
She didn't like us using the word waste, but do you think it's a waste if she files again for count one?
Again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Ms. Corey. You'd have to talk to her, and you did, and she gave you her answer. Again, you have to assume that if the conviction doesn't get overturned on appeal, you would think if we had foresight and we could see it was, then of course you would recharge and go forward. And then I agree with your point, if everything being what it is, he was going to get 60 years, which is life in prison, why would you go through another lengthy, costly trial? I can't even imagine what this trial cost the taxpayers of Jacksonville. The fact that we went through weekends, you had a sequestered jury, they did 3 days of deliberations, you had overtime of the officers here, and let me commend first and foremost the Jacksonville court staff, the court administration, the sheriff's office bailiffs were phenomenal. I can at least tell you this, the taxpayers should be very proud of the money they spent for the courthouse system. They were wonderful, they bent over backwards. So again, and to go back to your point, to retry count one for the sake of retrying it, and I do it, the Davis family should take consideration. They have a right to talk to Ms. Corey about that. But at least I don't think that was a waste of what was done here. It really was done well. They should be very commended for it. But going forward, that's going to be her decision as a state attorney, and she can make that decision for herself.
Corey, do you have any regrets in terms of how you tried the case, anything you do differently?
The fact that they were out for 30 hours, I literally have no regrets. But in the same time, they came back with a conviction, so I have all the regrets. I mean, it's miserable. I mean, honestly, I felt bad for the clerk of court. As she's reading the verdict, her hand was trembling, and your heart goes out for her because you know she's in a tough position. I've got the Dunn family behind me. I've got Michael next to me. I have a great relationship with Michael Dunn. I can tell you I've never seen the man get angry. I've never seen him show signs of violence or racism. It's just this case, my heart goes out to them. And again, my heart still goes out to the Davis family. Please, I don't want them to think I'm insulting them. I even said the other day, I even hated calling Ron Davis to the stand, and I told the jury I didn't want to do that. I didn't enjoy doing that. So do I have regrets? Personally, I can't look back and say I do, but then again, they found him guilty, so I've got to look back and say, man, I wish I could have done something different, but to be honest, sitting here today, I have no earthly clue what I could have done different in this case.
That 30-hour wait time, what was that like for Mr. Dunn?
Brutal. Every time I talk to him, he's in this small box in the back by himself. Basically can't talk to anyone. It was brutal for us. I mean, basically, my team and my investigative team and my curse team, the family, we were in our conference room and we were going stir crazy. I had to get up and walk the hallways because honestly, I would take a trial any day of the week. I would take a 3-week trial, a 4-week murder trial, and have 0 ounces of stress. But those 30 hours were probably the most stressful hours of my life. I cannot even imagine what Mr. Dunn was thinking because he was the one that was facing the verdict.
99% of this case was your client versus Jordan Davis. Was it self-defense? Was it murder? What was it? That was almost all of the case. Is it bizarre or frustrating or what to have essentially a victory from your side on that question, you got a hung jury, but to have him possibly go away for the rest of his life on all of the lesser charges?
And I agree, and I don't want to speak too much to count one, especially Michael Dunn versus Jordan Davis, because it will be retried again, as Ms. Corey said. So it's hard to call it a victory. I know a lot of defense attorneys come up and say, hey, a hung jury's a win, and we'll live to fight another day. But again, it's still tough when you know it was a hard-fought battle. The jury was out for 30 hours, and you have no idea what they were thinking. Again, yeah, it came down to Michael Dunn. It came down to what the jury believed. And unfortunately, without talking to that jury, we have no idea what went into their consideration. And based on their questions, you know, my fear is on possibly that appellate issue. Did they believe that Jordan Davis and that justifiable use of deadly force should have carried over to everybody? And that's something we're going to have to explore. So I don't want to go into it too much.
Do you think that...
You mentioned shock. Can you tell us anything else about how Michael Dunn is doing?
Again, he's in disbelief. It has not sunk in. Even when he sat next to me, he basically said, how is this happening? And I said, I'll talk to you in the back. We didn't want to make a comment out in the courtroom. The mics were on. But again, it has not set in. I don't think it'll set in anytime soon. Mr. Dunn has been steadfast in his position since the day that I've met him. So again, he clearly saw the outcome of this different. It wasn't. And he knows there's a road. He knows there's procedures we have to follow. He knows there's steps that we have to take. We've talked about that. Even prior to the verdict, we had talked about the good, the bad, the indifferent, and had a plan in place throughout the entire
And
process.
what did you say to him when the door shut after the verdict was read and you guys finally got a chance to talk?
I basically told him to stay strong, and I'm still with you, and we're still going to fight, and that was it. And we smiled at each other, and unfortunately, he went one way, and I went the other.
Those final 3 shots in the back of the car, how important do you think they were in the attempted murder?
Again, I don't know. I don't know. I wish I could talk to the jury. I wish they could reach out to me and call me and tell me. But again, if we all had a crystal ball, nobody in this room would be standing here. We would have known what the outcome is. We would have known what the trial would have been. That's why you have trials. That's why you go forward with the evidence. That's why you wait for the jury verdict. And in this case, it was probably the most tedious 30 hours, I think, if anybody could go through. And that also includes the victims' families. I'm sure they were extremely anxious as well. I can't imagine that they sat there and enjoyed that wait time as well.
Is Mr. Dunn still engaged to Ron Rowley?
I don't know. Like I said the other day, I didn't even talk to him about Rhonda. Once Rhonda left the stand, I was focused on closings. The last thing I'm going to talk to my client about is his personal love life and his murder trial. So that you're going to have to talk to Ms. Rattler about.
How much did you hear your case contradicting that?
I don't know. And again, I'd have to talk to the jury. We got it out in cross-examination that it's possible he could have said it, and in her emotional state, she didn't hear it. How much it played a factor into the jury is, again, a question for them. So until one of the jurors steps forward and says what happened, we would absolutely be guessing at it. All right?
Were you surprised that the letters and phone calls were not more of an issue on the state's behalf?
No, and I think they were used for a very limited purpose, and I don't think it would have hurt anymore. But again, I don't want to go too much into it because we still have to talk about count 1. So I don't know how the case is going to be retried by the state. So at that point, I think they used it for what they believe they needed and left it at that. And as Ms. Corey said, she put in evidence she thought they needed, and again, you'd have to talk to Ms. Corey.
What has this been like for you as a one-man show trying this case, especially with the state having at least 3 attorneys to rotate?
It didn't change anything. It is what it is. You have to fight it. You have to work the long hours. I fought it with everything I had. I think that was kind of obvious in what I did. Would it great to have the resources of an entire state attorney's office? Absolutely. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world. But the state, I commend them for the job that they did. Obviously, they convinced the jury on however they did it, so they can enjoy that, at least that part of the closure. Again, does it say I'm disappointed and shocked? Absolutely. Did I think there was reasonable doubt? Absolutely. Did the sheriff's office do a poor job for the counts that were settled through? I believe absolutely. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't believe it. I don't grandstand. I don't come up here and just spout things off because it sounds good. I basically ignored the media for well over a year until the jury had it in their hands and we were done. So,
You gotta be exhausted, though.
yeah, I think now it sets in. Basically, I was working on adrenaline and motivation and fight, and at this point, I'm sure tomorrow it will hit me, and we'll see. Tomorrow's another day, and for Michael, he'll live on to fight another day. I'll fight on for him, and if it takes a year, 2 years, and I'm here to fight, then I'll be there for that fight. I'll never back down, and that's just not the way I am. I'm not going to run. They could have had 5 attorneys, and I said that the other day, tongue in cheek. I don't care how many they have. I'm still going to stay and fight and do my job. If any defense attorney is worried about how many prosecutors are on the other side, they need to go do something else.
Mr. Schroeder, the state called far more witnesses than you did. Do you wish that you had called on more witnesses, and others have said that the character witnesses you did call on seem not to know Mr. Dunn as well as they would have expected.
Well, I think they should have looked at the testimony. I mean, the two witnesses from the family's community, they were with them every weekend for 10 years. You know, you spend every weekend and holidays and nights for 10 years. I think you know somebody fairly well. His friend Don Mays knew him for 20 years, worked together, they stayed friends together. So, again, look at your own personal experiences. Do you know somebody for 20 years you don't know very well? Do you live in a community with somebody for 10 years and not know them very well? Whoever says that, I don't think watched the testimony. And again, it's probably one of the talking heads that didn't watch the trial, but loves to comment on it.
Or do you think the media attention nationally around you did hurt your client in the end? Do you think?
Again, I don't know, it's speculation. You all know from the get-go, I didn't like the media attention to begin with, and that's what I was afraid of. We did believe we can get a fair trial in Jacksonville. I think we got a fair trial in Jacksonville. Again, I will never critique this jury. I've never seen a jury in any case in my career, or even heard of one, working as hard as they did. Do I like their end result? Do I like their verdict? Absolutely not. Do I agree with it? Absolutely not. But do I agree that they put the time in and gave Mr. Dunn a fair opportunity? 100%. I'll never doubt that one bit.
How big of an impact did Mr. Dunn's first attorney have on the end result?
I don't know. I know there were a lot of things said out in the media that might have fueled the fire, but I tried to limit even my exposure to it. Even when I first took the case, I just kind of saw a few things because I had heard she was speaking on his behalf. But again, you'd have to talk to her, you'd have to talk to Michael Dunn. I think it was far enough away that it didn't hurt, but I think it certainly didn't help the beginning. I think it was fuel to the fire, and then, as you all saw, it literally just, I think it got out of control way too fast. All right? Thank you very much, guys. Have a great night.